Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend, I have my best friend Connie returning as my special guest because ever since we buddy read my best friend's exorcism a couple of years ago, it's become a tradition for us to buddy read Grady Hendrix books. And even though we do still need to read We Sold Our Souls, Horror Store, and the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, we're hoping this next year we'll be able to knock those out. But in this episode, we're reviewing Grady Hendrix's How to Sell a Haunted House. And before we get started, I would just like to note that we buddy read this with our good online friend Hanny and our good friend Tammy, which we're very grateful for the opportunity to have read this with them because we had a lot of great discussions about characters and themes. But without me rambling on, let's see what's been new with Connie.
Hey everyone! I am so excited to be back and so very ready to dive into how to sell a haunted house. Everything's been pretty much the usual with me. Been working, trying to stay cool, excited for fall. Ben has started the school year. He's very excited, but please send him good thoughts as now this child has unhurt his nose while swimming. And that's pretty much what's going on with me.
All right, well, I hope everything goes good with Ben, and of course, I'm glad to have you back. But before we get started, we would just like to say thank you to Hanny and Tammy for buddy reading this with us. And if y'all are watching, we hope you enjoy this review. But without further ado, let's go have some pizza Chinese with Louise and Mark in the haunted house that they have inherited.
Yes.
How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix introduces a single mother by the name of Louise who one day receives an unexpected call from her brother Mark, which, to start with, she thinks Mark is calling because he simply needs money. However, after she answers, he reveals that their parents have died in a horrible accident.
From here, although Louise had grown distant from her family and she considers Mark to be a spoiled brat, she returns to her hometown to prepare for the upcoming funeral. And upon her arrival, she discovers her mom had become a hoarder and every room in the house is filled with dolls and handmade puppets, the majority of which had been used by their parents when they performed in a Christian puppet ministry.
After looking around, Louise finds not everything is matching up with the night that their parents died, such as the TV was left on when their father was adamant about turning the TV off, and their mother's purse was left on the kitchen table. But stranger than that, she finds where an air vent had been busted away from the wall, and the attic hatch had been nailed shut with its drawstring cut. Even still, she ignores all of these red flags and finds a rational excuse for everything.
Then, as the story progresses, tensions rise between Louise and Mark as they disagree about how the funeral should go, what should be done with their parents' house, and who gets what in the will. And after pulling some extremely petty stunts, they eventually reach a compromise and decide to sell their parents' house and divvy up their earnings.
Then, as they're getting their house market ready, they're confronted by a malicious supernatural entity that's been hiding out in their mother's favorite puppet named Pupkin.
And despite their differences, Louise and Mark must come clean at their past, stand together, and solve a dark family secret. Otherwise, Pumpkin could mean their death.
How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix was published in 2023. And on Hendrix's website, he explained that he wanted to write something comforting, old-fashioned, and gothic. Furthermore, he added haunted house books are all about family, family secrets, family histories, family curses, family stories. And one of the driving forces that encouraged him to write How to Sell a Haunted House during the pandemic was because he missed his family. Upon elaborating about families, Hendrix admitted that writing about family is hard because families are big, complicated, and weird. But he wanted to try writing about the subject because we are all shaped by our families due to the stories that they do and don't tell.
Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about how to sell a haunted house.
Every time. Every damn time. What the hell's wrong with you, Connie?
Spider!
Where?
In an interview composed by Lindy Rod with Rue Morgue magazine, when Hendrix was asked why he used puppets in his new novel, he answered that in his opinion, the novel is less of a killer puppet book and more of a haunted house book. Regardless, the reason he wanted to inflict killer puppets on people is because ghost stories and haunted house books are about the things that people leave behind when they die, which are both physical and emotional. And upon thinking about objects that are left behind, he started to consider our complicated relationship with inanimate objects, specifically stuffed animals from our childhood. From there, it was a short leap to killer puppets. On the author's website, Hendrix noted How to Sell a Haunted House is the last book set in a neighborhood where he grew up. Also, even though he didn't intend to write a trilogy about his hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, that's what happened. Which previous Hendrix books that make up this trilogy are My Best Friend's Exorcism and The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. And while Hendrix says he might write more books based in Charleston at a later date, his next two books are set in other times and places. Well, now that is out of the way, it's time to move on to the spoiler section. Now, if you haven't read this book before, you might want to go down to the comments and click the timestamp provided at the pinned comment at the top. It will direct you on to the thought section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go. Shh, he's in a coma.
Now that everyone's had the opportunity to click away, we would like to talk about a few of our favorite moments.
First up is the squirrel scene. Now, up to this point, Louise and Mark are disagreeing still about the house, what to do with the parents' house, and who's getting one in the wheel. And they just become really ruthless and petty, basically seeing who can piss each other off more. Now, Louise decides to take her sweet little time going through her mama's art and dolls, and she decides to take a nap. Now, not long after she lays down and dozes off, she wakes up because she hears a strange noise. And she looks around and she sees a squirrel that's crawled at the foot of the bed. Now, at first, she thinks it's just a regular squirrel that don't come out of the attic. Then, after seeing its haggard state, she realizes it's actually the taxidermy squirrel of Joseph that her mother had made for a squirrel nativity. And before she can even react, here comes Squirrel Mary, who was equally gross, equally tattered, and before she can even do anything, they start attacking her. They're biting at her. They're scratching at her. They're getting all under her clothes. And if that isn't bad enough, here comes Squirrel Baby Jesus. So after gaining the upper hand, she's able to sling the squirrels off and beat the hell out of them with a racket, which gives her just enough time to make her way to the bathroom and lock the door. But even so, one of the squirrels tries to poke its head under the door, and when it does, she stomps that sucker like a grape under her heel. Now, this scene did make my toes curl and kind of hit close to home because I myself have had to fight off local wildlife and I don't like squirrels. So it was double the horror. And Hendrix, I thought, did a really good job showcasing her fears and emotions during all this because I thought Louise was a goner. I really thought she was about to die because me, myself, if I'm fighting squirrels, especially living dead squirrels, I ain't gonna be no good to nobody. But Louise put up one hell of a fight. And when she went swinging like a Williams sister, I was like, you go, girl.
Next up, I would like to talk about the first time Pupkin attacked Louise. So, following the squirrel incident, Cousin Mercy explained to the siblings that their parents' house is haunted. Louise recalls a time during her childhood when Pupkin tried to influence her to kill Mark, and she's noticed their doll replicas have been moving around on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But despite all of these red flags, she decides that she's going to spend the night at their parents' house. Well, on this particular night, she has a nightmare that her daughter Poppy is playing with Pupkin, which during this dream, she wakes up and discovers that her bedroom door is open and she's not alone. So after she reaches for her cell phone, Pupkin clamps onto her hand and tries to force her to wear him like the puppet he is. Now, even though Louise is able to sling Pupkin off, this creepy little bastard stands right back up, hisses at her, then charges at her feet. And after she's able to get away, she runs down the hall where she trips on a chair that Pupkin had rigged up as a booby trap. But before she can stand, Pupkin jumps on top of her and rams a needle into her eyeball. Which, it's at this moment that Hendrix takes the opportunity to describe in fine detail how that needle feels in her eyeball as she's trying to close her eyelid. So this interaction scared the ever-loving living hell out of me, and it made me cringe.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I think the reason why this scene works so well is because of how Hendrix set it up.
Mm-hmm.
For starters, when Carrie's out of town, one of my greatest fears is to wake up at night in a house that is supposed to be empty, only to discover that there's someone in the room with me. Which, that's exactly what Hendrix does here.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, I'm normally not afraid of dolls or puppets, but the design that Hendrix gave Pupkin is pure nightmare fuel. Because this creepy little bastard has this gnome face and this bucktooth grin, and it just looks way too happy and demented at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Then, to add the cherry on the cake, Pupkin actually hisses at Louise before he attacks her.
Kind of like a gaggle.
And I don't know why that scared me so much. Maybe it's kind of like this warning cry before he actually attacks. But it sealed the deal for me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I thought Hendrix couldn't go any further with this and make it any more creepy or disturbing, he introduces the needle in the eyeball scene.
Ooh.
And, oh, God! Oh. That was it. Another moment that made me realize this was a terrifying book was when Pupkin called out his secret weapon.
Ooh.
Now, at this point, Louise and Mark had joined hands to battle Pupkin, which, after they find Pupkin in the attic, Pupkin tries to manipulate Mark into putting him on his hand so Pupkin can gain control over him.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when Mark refuses to do so, Pupkin calls out Mark's forgotten imaginary friend named Spider. And if Mark continues to disobey, Pupkin will have Spider kill Louise. From here, Louise hears this growling over her shoulder, and when she turns to face it, Spider attacks her.
Ooh.
And since Spider is this imaginary friend, he can change colors, he can have as many legs as he wants, he has this mouthful of just sharp, drooling fangs, and he can climb walls. Not to mention, he looks like this canine arachnid hybrid that can appear and disappear at will. Y'all, Spider came out of nowhere. And the randomness that came along with him, it really made me wonder if Hendrix had this planned, or if he just sat down one day and said, you know what this book needs? It needs this creepy-ass imaginary friend that looks like it came off of the set of John Carpenter's The Thing and can disappear at will. And even though my rational brain thinks that something like Spider could not exist, the way that he appears and his abilities totally up the ante for the creep factor. And include with that how intense the fight sequence was that followed.
Yeah.
That is a pure damn solid scare.
Now, another favorite scene is when Louise returns home only to find she has not rid herself of Pumpkin.
Oh, yes.
I know.
Mm.
And before all this goes down, Louise has survived the attack of Spider. She cuts off Mark's arm in order to save him from Pumpkin, and while Mark is in the hospital, she returns to their parents' home and burns Pumpkin on the grill. And afterwards, she's feeling safe because she doesn't feel like the house is haunted anymore. She doesn't get that sense anymore. And plus, Pumpkin's been burned to ash. Now, about a week later, she returns home to her daughter only to find her mother in law has made an exact replica of the puppet and is influencing her behavior. This scene had me going like, what the hell? I thought Pumpkin was dead, but no, here he comes again like Chucky's long lost brother with 9 lives. And had this happened to me, I'd have pissed my pants too. When the reveal happened, I felt every ounce of fear, panic, horror, shock that Louise felt. I mean, imagine thinking your nightmare is over. You killed your monster. You go home only to be faced with it again, and that nightmare is on the hand of your daughter.
We would like to take this opportunity to bitch. Hit it, Picky.
Today, I would like to take the time to bitch about Louise. First impression, she's a stuck-up, know-it-all bitch. I mean, you automatically assume Ian's going to be this terrible father. You think your parents are circus people, and your brother is this irresponsible man-child, meanwhile acting like you're God's gift. And I got news for you, Lulu. Your shit stinks like everybody else. And why are you going to sit there and get mad at your brother for doing the exact same thing to you that you're trying to do to him? Make it make sense. Now, having said all that, something happened and I wasn't prepared for. Louise is a very complicated character, and the more the story went on, the more I began to understand her and soften towards her. And I mean, she put up one hell of a fight within Squirrels and Spider, and of course, her fight to save Poppy was pretty admirable. To be honest, I think after she faced that childhood trauma, it gave her the peace she needed to be that mom and sister she wanted to be.
I would like to take this opportunity to bitch about Mark.
Go ahead.
Now, the first time this asshole stepped on the page, I thought to myself, well, here's your typical man-child who throws a tantrum because he didn't get what he wanted when he wanted it, and because of that, the world is gonna end.
Mm-hmm.
And because of how he treats Louise, hell, I understand why she doesn't want to have anything to do with his little titty baby ass.
Right.
And when I thought that this living version of Baby Huey couldn't get any worse, everything changes and he saves Louise. Then we gain his backstory, and I was like, damn, bro, I'm sorry you went through that. And the more I learned about him, the more I saw that he and Louise were practically the same person, and they had both endured an equal amount of hurt that had been deliberate and accidental. Which I really feel like Louise and Mark were two characters who were flawed, and they meant well, but they just didn't have an open sense of communication, which caused them to have a relationship that was bad when it could have been good all along. Also, I was really surprised to see that there were two sides to this story because I had spent so much time not liking Mark.
Right.
I was completely blindsided that he had a bad past as well. So at the end of the day, when I discovered how things really were, I felt a level of sorrow for both characters that I did not expect to feel. How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix followed the classic ghost story formula, but at the same time it was contemporary enough to speak to new generations about dysfunctional families. And even though we felt like the characters were enjoyable and engaging, not everyone felt that way, because after I looked around online, I noticed where quite a few people DNF'd this book because they felt like Mark was way too intolerable. Which, to those who quit reading, I would say you might have DNF'd way too soon because there's two sides to every story.
Aside from that, we noticed this book covered a lot of important topics such as the stages of acceptance, the importance of not censoring your children, using fictional subjects as motivators for your kids, what we leave behind for our family, how to cope with loss, and dark family secrets.
Character wise, as I said, I really did enjoy these flawed characters. And considering the amount of people I've seen who quit reading because they couldn't stand Mark, that really tells me Hendrix is great when it comes down to tapping into people's emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And with bickering aside, I really felt like this book still had a good balance of heart, humor, and horror, which I tend to think Hendrix is the master of.
I really enjoyed the characters and How to Sell a Haunted House, and because of their complexity, it really just made them feel more layered. And because neither lead was perfect, it really just made them feel more human. And it was such a treat to see the sibling relationship grow and change throughout.
Theme wise, overall, this book focuses on the stages of acceptance. And so
Mhm.
readers will understand this is what they're experiencing. The book is divided into sections that are titled Denial, Anger, Bargaining, Depression, and Acceptance.
Although some may think this book only focuses on one example of reaching acceptance, this topic is seen throughout the book in multiple ways.
Of course, one of which is dealing with the loss of a loved one, such as what we see Mark and Louise go through when they discover their parents have died.
And other than that, we see acceptance come into play with how Mark reacts to losing a limb. And we see this subject again with Louise having to come to terms with the fact that her parents' house is haunted.
Even more important, this book shows how we have to cope with our own mortality
Hmm.
because eventually, one day, we're all going to be dead.
And with those examples, we feel like this book does a great job in general just showing how difficult it can be for humans to reach acceptance.
The next subject we noticed is the idea that it's okay to let children be children. But at the same time, it's not good to shelter them from the basic stages of life. So, because of this, a nice portion of this book regards overprotective parents.
For example, owning a pet is a good way to teach a child responsibility and care, but it's also an opportunity for them to learn that nothing lives forever.
And since Louise and Mark's parents never allowed them to have pets for fear that they would one day have to explain to their children what death was,
Hmm.
Louise didn't have any examples to lead by. So when she became a mother and she had to explain to her daughter what death was, she struggled with the subject.
And due to how the subject is presented, Hendrix really makes us question exactly how and when to explain to your child that everything dies and death is a natural part of life.
Aside from that, we notice how this book presents the subject of parents using fictional characters to motivate their child's behavior and how that could be damaging in the long run.
Hmm.
Which, this is the idea of if you don't do this, Santa won't bring you that new bike. Or if you do this, your toys won't be happy.
And even though that type of manipulation might work in the moment, it could cause the parents to lose credibility in the eyes of their child and also make that child have long lasting trust issues.
Along with those subjects, this book shows how to deal with loss, which this circles
Hmm.
back around to the stages of acceptance and realizing everyone has to go through these stages in order to advance.
And while everyone is built different, we eventually see the benefits of ending family feuds and coming together so no one has to grieve alone.
Which, even though this book does show grief can be hard, grief doesn't have to be for nothing because it can be used to bury hatchets and to build stronger relationships. Another subject we noticed is what we leave behind for our families, which this is touched on by how Louise and Mark have literally inherited a hoard of useless junk and now they're left to deal with it.
And in that regard, this book really brings the focus that objects being nothing more than objects, and we really see the difference between things that have a financial value versus things that have a sentimental value.
Also, we notice where this book focused on dark family secrets, which, as we all know, secrets never stay buried. And ghost stories are the perfect setting to explore this idea because ghosts exist in fiction as a reminder of a seedy past that had been swept under the rug.
And this book really shows the burden of keeping a family secret, especially after vowing to a loved one you would never tell the truth. And it really shows how the past can come back to affect future generations without them even knowing the cause, and in some cases can turn siblings into enemies.
Overall, How to Sell a Haunted House scared the ever loving living hell out of me. And even though this didn't gross me out, there were quite a few scenes that creeped me the hell out. And because of the fear factor this provided, I really feel like this is going to be in my top three scariest reads for the year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the book grossed me out or anything, but it definitely kept me on my toes and guessing. But I also will say I did get creeped out a time or two with Pumpkin.
How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix is a strong supernatural gothic novel that introduces a new iconic face of horror in the subgenre of evil dolls and puppets.
And like what Hendrix is known for, although this book is darker than the ones we previously read, it still blends together his humor, horror, and heart that he's known for.
So, if you're looking for a pulse pounding ghost story that will scare you and make you reach for the Kleenex at the same time, then I highly recommend How to Sell a Haunted House.
Yeah, I highly recommend the book too. It kept me on my toes the entire time. I really enjoyed the flow of the book and the character development. It even had me teary eyed at the end. It is just a really good buddy read with friends.
Well, now that we're at the end of this episode, I would just like to thank you for buddy reading this with me.
Thank you for having me back. I really enjoyed it.
Of course, and now that we're going into spooky season, I know you have plans to read a Halloween book with me.
Yeah.
So we're not going to say what that book is, but yeah, she's going to be back sooner than later.
Yeah, definitely. I can't wait to come back. Thank you for having me back and showing all the love. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we will see you next round.
See you then.
Well, now that Connie is scampered off, I would like to thank these amazing people for contributing to my Patreon account. As you can tell, some of the names listed here are creators, so be sure to check out their work. And if you would like to contribute to my Patreon account as well, I have a link available in the description section of this episode, where for $5 a month, I'll give you a shout out at the end of my videos. And if there is a profession you would like for me to tie to your name, just let me know and I'll include that as well. Also, I do have a $10 tier available, where for $10 a month, I'll still give you this shout out, but I do creepy photography on the side. So at the beginning of every month, I'll send you over one of my creepy photos. From there, you can print it off and do whatever you like with it. So if you're able to do this, that's awesome. If not, no sweat. I just hope you return to this channel so we can have a good time together. Also, if you would like to hit me up on social media, links to my Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram are all available in the description section of this episode. And if you have not subscribed to this channel, be sure to subscribe and click that notifications bell because I have more book reviews coming in the near future. So until we see each other again, I hope you're doing well and sweet nightmares.